Shawn, welcome to Sport Journeys. It's great to have you on. Um, you've described your work as being about remembering our way home. And before we get into the arc of your career, where do you feel most at home right now? And was it always that way?
Mm. Well, thanks, Milan, for having me, and thanks to the podcast for having me. I really like the work that you guys are doing, and the fact that you're elevating these stories of people and their journeys. It's the most human thing, and I think we're also stuck in this idea of what's right and what we should do. That hearing examples of people who are sort of brushing that away and coming into a realization of who their real selves are is great. So thanks for having this podcast, and thanks for having me.
Excellent.
Home, yeah. Um, it's a question that I've certainly struggled with my whole life. So I grew up in the U.S. I've like most non-Native Americans, or all non-Native Americans, my people, my ancestors come from somewhere else. And as a very common American thing, we pick one of those lineages and we hyphenate it with American. So I'm Irish American, despite having many other cultures built in there. But I was born in one city, one state, raised in another, with this sort of Irish diaspora sense of connection to a certain lineage, a certain way of knowing certain stories, and never felt any real relationship with land, never felt any real relationship with one particular story. And then I moved to Sweden and it started all over again. And here it's a new land, new stories. I'm the outsider, and then became a father. So I was responsible for raising my two Swedish kids in a particular land with particular stories, trying to sort of honor my own mixed matched lineage and stories, but also try to root them in something. So, this idea that place is something you belong to is I've come to appreciate in this global wandering that I've done and this uncertainty of what it means to be somewhere, to be in a place that it's really been more about the quality of attention that I provide to it. And I spent so much time longing for this sense of rootedness or this sense of belonging to a place. But really, it was this insecurity in myself, insecurity with those stories I mentioned. And I started to find that and learn that my attention to something, that my attention to where I am, wherever that may be, that was the most important thing. And which brings us to like rootedness, because rootedness is, certainly place based. It is land based. It's connected to a specific place. But this idea of belonging, which is where I put more of my attention, is that sort of attention to where we are, is that tuning into people, land, culture. So there's a long answer to your short question, but this idea of, well, what is home? What is place? Where am I? What am I working for, fighting for, loving? It's a question I've wrestled with for my entire life, basically.
I can certainly relate to that. And I do feel like a global citizen. And right now, I don't really feel rooted or at home in a particular place. I like to think of it as being able to feel at home in multiple places. But I think this is something that comes out of what you're sharing online in your work is the importance of place, the importance of belonging, or as you put it, rootedness. And I want to explore that a little bit later on as well, and really get a sense of how we can reclaim that and what your ideas are for that. Um, so, I mean, what is it? How do you reconcile that desire for rootedness when you have such a varied background and you're American, you live in Sweden. How do you bring it all together?
Uh, in a long, messy series of arcs and twists and turns, I think is the first answer. Um, so I grew up in one place. I was uh, what you would call the all-American kid. So I identified with all the mythology of being American, what that meant. I served in the military. I worked in politics. I was an environmentalist and activist when I was younger. This idea of being American, this mythological version of being American was really core to my identity. And when I moved to Sweden, it was supposed to be temporary. I moved here to study sustainability back in the old days, in 2007, 2008. And I never thought that I would stay here at all. I thought that I'd come, learn this new-ish thing called sustainability, and then go back to my life in politics, which is what I had been doing before. For me, I and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but there was this tumultuous period of life that, well, most of life, that was informed by a lot of traumatic experiences and responses to that trauma, which we can talk about later. When I lived in the US, which was multiple cities, I'd worked in campaign politics, so I'd been in multiple cities through that work. There was always this high level of stress. My body never felt good. So I had good titles and doing the right work, and it felt important and had all of the measurables that we're supposed to want in, this modern life, especially as a male. I had definable activities and jobs and purpose. And it was only when I moved to Sweden. I was in this small town in the south of Sweden, and all of a sudden, my body calmed down, and there was this amazing uh, pause that I could feel in my body. I couldn't describe it at the time as I might now, but there was this relaxation, and the whole body just relaxed. And it was a year of a master's degree. There was time off. There was time for reflection. There was a different community, a different pace, a different vibe. But I instantly, when I landed in this country and in that town, I felt the difference. And for me, in connecting with this definition of who I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do, the life I'm supposed to live, it was all thrown out the window when I was in this peaceful environment, this calm environment. And that was the land itself, but it was also the way people interacted with one another. That felt very grounding at a time when I realized I never felt grounded, uh, ever. And now, 20 years later, it's still here. And, as I said, I had struggled with this idea of rootedness. If you know Simone Weil, a wonderful writer, she talked about rootedness being the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. And this, it was such an abstract idea of rootedness until I literally felt my feet in the ground and like, oh, this feels right. So playing that difference between, American story about what I'm supposed to do, living the right life, doing the right things, and then landing in a place where finally the land was speaking to me. Uh, that that was something that helped root me then and continues to do so now because my work is still involves international work as well.
Mm. And you have worked with some very high profile people on some very, let's say, big topics, big issues in the
Mhm.
past. And so it was very interesting to get a sense of what precipitated that shift, the move to Sweden. And I think that's something that a lot of our listeners can relate to, as you achieve all of the hallmarks of success. And there's almost a guilt around that, like, I'm doing so well, I should feel I should feel happy. I should be satisfied with this. And why is this not feeding my soul, right? Why do I need to find something that's more meaningful? And yeah, I think that we had a parallel experience, kind of moving to. Well, I'll speak from my experience moving to Sweden, out into uh, nature, into a small village, and then being able to ground there, at least for a few years. And it was such a contrast from being a digital nomad living in cities. And it's something that I certainly want to return to at some point. So since moving to Scandinavia, you've built something quite impressive. You've co-founded the first impact investor network in Scandinavia. You've worked at Triodos and Blue Orchard. And so from the outside, it was all aligned with your work and sustainability, if I can put it that way. And what was happening for you on the inside as you were doing this work and building these projects?
Mm. I love these stories, these questions about like our sort of origin story, and the movie version, the LinkedIn version. They're all very linear and make total sense, and really well rehearsed. Yeah, I mean, I started working in politics, so I served in the Marine Corps, um, and there's a story to each of these pieces, which we don't need to go into detail. But for me, it was about being part of the best teams, doing the best things, uh, representing the best possible option for every step I took. So this is what was happening in my mind. Um, I worked in the Marine Corps. I served in the Marine Corps. Said if I'm going to serve in the military, it should be the best branch, um, arguable. Um, and certainly, this is the 18-year-old version of me, not the sort of 48-year-old version of me. Worked in politics, and I was lucky to intern with Al Gore before he was sort of the environmental superstar that he later became. And so my very first political job was working on his political campaign for president in 2000. And that was, this epic battle of, as we framed it, good versus evil. US politics is, that's also a whole podcast in itself. But this idea of only two parties hits different viewpoints pretty starkly against one another. And so I was already at 22 years old, entered into this, what felt like a battle of good versus evil, right versus wrong, one direction or the wrong direction. And it really set the tone for how I would work. And I worked in politics for nearly 9 years, in campaign politics, in these sort of these battles for uh, good versus evil, right versus wrong. And I got caught up in that. And this performance of and all the machinery that went into campaign politics, into convincing people your way is right. I mean, that is what campaigning is. It's marketing for people's livelihoods. Really played out. And the break I took in Sweden, graduate school first, and then eventually work, gave me this opportunity to reframe how I wanted to use that energy of fighting for something for which I believed, but doing it in a way that was less aggressive all the time and less harmful to myself and harmful to the other side. I later appreciated that the people on the other side of those politics were still people, and I was positioning them very black and white as good versus evil. And that wasn't fair. There were people I disagreed with, but they had their own reasons and their own values. So doing this arc from politics into sustainability, I got a dream job right out of graduate school here in Sweden. That's what kept me here originally. Um, and worked in this new space of impact investing later on, helped create that space both in Sweden and the Nordics. and then got hired for these well-known Swiss and later Dutch asset managers. I was doing everything that was purpose-driven, mission-aligned, as we would have said. It was meaningful work. It was doing the good stuff and getting paid to do it. And that story arc of working in campaign politics, convincing people of how to back the right things and good things for the planet and good things for society, and then doing sustainability and impact investing. It all was a perfect logical story. And I was never satisfied. I was always unhappy. If you've ever seen or listened to the musical Hamilton, You Will Never Be Satisfied is this third theme of Alexander Hamilton. I'll break into song if you want. But this idea of just never being satisfied. I had accumulated financial comfort. That's what you're supposed to want. I had job titles that were, you say, impressive. They said to the world something. I wore a suit. I talked in front of conferences and gatherings, and I was, by all measurements, doing well, and was very unhappy inside, very unsatisfied, and didn't know why. And so that lack of satisfaction, that lack of joy, that lack of meaning in quote unquote meaningful work it was always there. It's this ever pervasive thing in my life, and I didn't know why. And it took COVID. So doing that journey I just mentioned for 20 plus years, that slowing down that COVID provided us gave me time to finally reflect on like, oh, there's something else happening inside me that has nothing to do with my job. Has nothing to do with sort of the LinkedIn version of me. That is something a little deeper. And that began the process that sort of got me to where I am today, which we can talk about more.
Absolutely. So thanks for sharing that. That's a really a wide view on your career path and how you became the man you are today. Is I could see two distinct turning points from your career in the military to going into politics and then going into sustainability and impact investing. And so then, would you say then COVID was a further turning point where you, what was the shift that took place from that time? You took a sabbatical. How long was it? What did you do, and what happened for you after that?
So I'll get back to the COVID and sabbatical in a moment, but if I can do that wide lens again, from the time I was a child, so my father passed away when I was 4.5 years old, and the first thing I heard as a child was, "You're in charge of your mom now," which is a ridiculous thing to say to a child. And whoever said that to me, the family member who said that, they didn't know any better. But I had in my mind, like, boy, I have a responsibility for leadership. I have a responsibility to be the man. And I wasn't ready for that, obviously. And I didn't have that male father figure. I didn't have a father or that male figure or figures in my life who were helping to bring that ridiculous expectation down to sort of a reality and helping me learn to be a man, how to learn to deal with responsibility and power and all these things that we expect. So absent from that sort of proper coming of age, that proper learning to be a man, I found ways to be as manly as possible in the definition I had that. And that was everything from being, picking fights as a kid, showing my strength. I played American football. Like that was the toughest thing I was able to do institutionally, organizationally. It was awesome. And that's a whole story in itself as well. But like I went to this very big sort of nationally ranked high school football program. And it was all about showing off strength, and thousands of people would come watch us on a Friday night. It was amazing. I went into the military, as I mentioned. I played rugby in university. I worked in politics, which was a pugilistic sort of endeavor as well. I loved the fight. And for me, it was all filling this gap of what it meant to be a man in different periods of my life without actually having anyone guide me on what it truly means to be a man, to be a responsible, age appropriate version of myself, and what it means to grow into the next step, to go through those different transitions. So by the time I became a father, which happened before COVID, I am a father of two sons. And these definitions of what sort of masculinity meant, what responsibility meant, I had, either the movie version of what those should be, or the examples I had found in the various industries, which were all male dominated, like politics, like finance. And I wasn't getting very good examples of what it meant to be a good, responsible, grounded man, but also example for the kids I was raising. And that was this sort I think that was one of the first moments when it wasn't just about what was happening in my head. There was plenty happening through my entire life, uncertainty, et cetera. But when I was finally a father, and like what was happening in my head had an impact on someone else's life directly and forever, I realized, oh, I think it's time to get to know me better, to put some of these stories to rest that are not serving me, to put some of these traits that I had and these patterns that I had that weren't serving me to rest, because I needed to set an example for these two boys. And, that's part of the equation. I have a wife who also recognized that and supported me in that journey, emotionally, physically, especially during times of depression, during times of sort of mass chaos that was happening in my head, the anxiety attacks. Someone who was patient and caring and there with me while I was going through that period. And so those two journeys, the sort of the guy with a messed up head going through his journey of anxiety and self discovery, uh, and doing the performative sort of right things, all came to this crux during COVID, because I sat there and I'm like, oh, I'm selling financial products. They're meaningful. They are, impact related. They tell a good story. But what's happening in me, in my head, in my body, and who I am as a father, as a man, it doesn't align with all that. And so I had the luxury of being able to take time, and I did. And we can get into that whole journey as well. But that was, being a father, I'd say, for most of us who are parents, that was the period of time when it was a really big mirror in my life. Are you being the right person for this child, for these children? And if not, what are you going to do about it? And then a few years later, we still keep hearing those same questions, and then the world stops. Maybe I should actually listen to that question that's being asked and listen to my body. Um, so fatherhood is a wonderful mirror into the soul, and a wonderful opportunity to take to take this long pause in life, and to take a long pause and really start to figure out myself in a constructive way.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. It's, I think, when you say there aren't a lot of healthy male role models, culturally speaking, that certainly strikes a chord. And yeah, I think it's interesting how becoming a father then made you take a moment and pause to think about, like, how can I be that positive male, uh, be a father and positive male role model that from what I'm hearing you didn't really have growing up, that you had
Mm.
that more kind of machismo or being a man is to be strong, right? And in kind of outward way, is what I'm picking up there. So,
I mean, sorry to cut you off. I have so many examples, and I apologize to your listeners who aren't men, but I think uh, the this difficulties that men are going through is a societal challenge. And the examples from my own life and the expectations that I faced, the sort of the fallacies of what it means to be a man and what success is and what fitting in is, uh, are being felt by many. But when we're raising societies of men from our generation to the current generation, we are all going through this journey of trying to figure out who we are without very good examples in a society that doesn't have sort of ceremony or ritual or for transition through different stages of life, while placing expectations that are unrealistic, and also saying you're not allowed to talk about how it feels on the inside, whether that resonates with you. Uh, we're living in a disconnected from our bodies, disconnected from elders who can guide us, disconnected from our communities, disconnected from the land, and disconnected from any sort of deeper sense of meaning. And what do? We act out accordingly. So in my case, I got in fights when I was 27. I nearly died from getting in a fight with three guys on a street in Philadelphia in an alley. I mean, it was like straight out of a movie. Stupid. I had a brain injury, nearly died from that. That was a good wake up call. And, getting into this fight, and or cover up, cover up, cover up, like where we're just constantly saying we're fine, we're okay, and we bottle up what's actually happening inside of us. And you have the result of that is, we comfort ourselves, drinking, drugs, video games, porn, whatever it is that we do. We sort of brush it off and say we're fine, we're good, or it explodes into our relationships, into our work lives. You have, as a result, a high rate of suicide and deaths of despair, as they call them, especially amongst men, high rates of alcoholism and addiction, et cetera, et cetera. And I was on that path as well for quite some time. And uh, when you recognize it, when you've gone through it, as I did, when you've healed, you never fully heal, but when you've addressed those things head on and found ways to ground them, to learn from them, to find community, to support that healing, then for me, sharing that journey with others has been the most important thing that I could possibly do, bringing a both in my own space where like they can talk about, yeah, actually the expectations are hard. Yeah, things don't align with what I'm told I should do versus what I need to do or what works best for me or my family or my community. So just giving people space to talk about that and heal from that. It was only when I was given those things by other people that I was able to sort of deprogram, to become a better version of myself, to become a better father. Uh, and that work plays largely into what I do today in helping uh, men, of course, young men and older men, but also the communities in which they live and that they're part of. Is how do we create respectful relationships between the sexes, between uh, and generations, and really do something to fix this epidemic of a problem we have, which is a bunch of broken people going around pretending they have all the answers and not seeking help.
um,
Might have taken us a little direction off of the initial question. I'm sorry.
it's great. It's great. You paint a wide and deep picture, and I think that what you're sharing there also connects and leads into this interest that you've expressed about what's really happening in a wider sense, right? This, what some people have called the meta crisis, where, you know, we have this lack of transition, and we have a lack of groundedness or rootedness, and we're disconnected from our elders, as you say. I mean, as a specific example, right? There's no initiation rite as we become adults in the technological society, right? And so I can see how your background kind of organically leads to your current work and your interests. Do you want to share a little bit more about some of the specific projects that you're working on currently? I know you're working on a book. You've got There are the Hearth Summits. There's the Academic Consortium, the Future is Fungi Award. Right? Do you want to talk a little bit about this current work that you're doing, and kind of what's your motivation for those different projects?
Yeah. So following that journey that I've mentioned, post-COVID, post-sabbatical, after having done that healing journey, the question was, okay, we're dealing with, I had been dealing with sustainability related topics for a very long time. And the world was, some things were getting better, but mostly they're getting worse and worse, faster and faster. And this idea, as I had gone through my own healing journey, my own awakening, I started to realize that the work of reconnecting with myself first allowed me to be a stronger version of myself, a more secure version of myself, a better parent, a better spouse, a better member of the community. Uh, and if I wasn't feeling up to snuff prior to that, and I knew most of the people in my life weren't there either, then we had a well-being topic that wasn't being addressed. And if we're going to talk about big societal issues, whether it's from politics or finance or sustainability or any sort of wide angle topic, we really need to ensure that there's a community, a culture of well-being, not only focused on the individual, which we have plenty of sort of wellness focus on the individual, but how do we really focus in belonging in the context of community, in the context of society? So I started at the Wellbeing Project over almost 3 years ago, which is an NGO based out of France, which is working on the topic of well-being. Specifically, it started with change makers and the topic of burnout, and expanded into the organizations for which they work, and then into academia, research, policy, etc. And we connected and said, how can we bring this topic of change, inner development, of well-being in the context of the world that's crumbling right now, in the world and this transition period we're in, where the systems that we've come to expect will serve us are no longer serving us. So we have this program called Ecological Belonging, which I lead, which is has a number of different elements, as you mentioned, from a global network of change makers in 28 countries, all bringing people into the community and trying to rid a society. We do policy work in this world. We have academic work. So there's a lot of activity related to this idea of belonging, of what we call ecological belonging, the broader ecology of which we're all part. There's that work. And then that's sort of on the international level. And then I have that in Sweden as well. So how do we bring the same idea, bringing people back into a right relationship with community, with the land during these transition times? So we have a community of people doing similar work here in Sweden that I also initiated. And then, as I mentioned with the men's topic, part of another philanthropy called the Real, it's a men's mental health focused foundation where we're looking at this topic of men's health, men's mental health, and lack thereof, and trying to raise money and awareness around those topics. So I do a lot of men's work, both in the walks that we do once a month, men's mental health, men's groups, and speaking and talking on these topics as well. Um, so it's really trying to bring this culture of well-being and belonging into the sort of the meta topics that we talk about into the more technical topics, but really humanizing it, because I think we've largely forgotten our humanity in the work that we do, and we've lost our connection to the bigger picture of which we're part, and that is the living world, the living planet, the web of life that includes us but isn't exclusively us. And so my consulting practice is working on the big topics of collapse, on the big topics of dealing with war, dealing with resource depletion, et cetera, but trying to bring it back to this idea of home, as you started the interview off with. Like, what does it mean to live? How do we live? What are we doing all this for? How do we, know the big topics, deal with them, prepare for them, focus on resilience? But how do we bring it back to ourselves? How do we bring it back to our communities, to our bodies, to our reason for existing? Long-winded answers. All that's
Oh, wow, that's a lot. And you're working on the book, right?
mm.
I mean,
So
what's your thinking with that? What is it that
mm.
you want to share with that book, and where's the book at?
Yeah, in editing now, second round, so close to the end. So I probably later this year. Not probably. The expectation is in the spring, in the off this year, be released. And this and my Substack has the same name, work with the Wellbeing Project, and was going through my own journey. Um, the question was, do I know all these topics? And if we're talking about bringing people back in relationship to the land, to the web of life, etc., that is very indigenous thinking, and all of our ancestors were indigenous at some point as Europeans, but we've lost that indigeneity. So here I was talking about these topics and realized I don't know if I know enough about those. So my Substack was this sort of public way of just creating what I called my foundational essays. Do I know these topics in depth enough to be able to then go around and talk about them? And what I had discovered both through the sort of the writing in Substack and then the development of the book was, as you and I have now been talking about, like this relationship, this disconnection we've had from our bodies, from our communities, from the land, from a deeper sense of meaning, that's rooted somewhere. And there are plenty of books about collapse. There are plenty of books that are judgments on the modern world, but we don't personalize them enough. We don't really ground them in a rootedness and a sense of belonging. So this book sort of weaves the story of the times we're in, the challenges we're facing, hospicing this modernity that we live in, and or the machine that we live in. Like it's an indictment on those things, but an invitation on how to live differently, on how to live more fully. And so the arc of that story is going from collapse, which can both be societally, but also I use my own examples of depression, of my own personal collapses. How do we go through collapse and come out the other end? And how do we do that in a deeply loving and a deep sense of belonging way in community, in relationship with the land, and with others? And so it's a lot of these topics we've talked about sort of boiled down into a book version.
Uh, so that's a really broad scope. I can see that, from being a father, having your family, and doing this work around that's very grounded, the men's work, men's mental health, and an important and under discussed topic, I would say. So I'm glad to hear you picking that up. Because men are tough, right? We don't have problems. We're the strong ones. We're the ones that protect. But men can also be so vulnerable and struggle with mental health, certainly, and we mask that with certain behaviors, as you pointed out, like drinking. Right? But like from what we do with Mycelium Hub is, we look at the what happens behind the scenes, right? The mycelium is takes care of a lot of the operational work of the forest, connecting organisms, routing resources, right? And from that perspective, I'm interested in how you hold together all of this. This is a lot of work. This is you focus on, you do this work in impact investing, and you're on different advisory boards. You're working on this book. You're working with people locally. How do you hold it together in an operational sense? Like, how do you approach the doing of this, and how do you give yourself enough breathing space to pace yourself and to kind of distribute your attention in a sustainable way, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Great question. And I think the most fundamental question, because if we boil down everything that I've said, there was a period where I went into deep burnout, went into sort of what we call the midlife crisis. When we're going through it, we appreciate later as a midlife transition, to have gone through sort of somatic healing practices and other things that brought me back into deeper connection with myself. It is then easy to give that up, uh, to go right into urgency mode again and go, 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 fight, 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 all the things I tried to heal from. So I'd say the as I don't think we talked about, but I have a Zen Buddhist practice in the Plum Village tradition that I picked up several years ago, which this idea of mindfulness, this idea of connecting to myself, being grounded, and that ability to breathe through the stress or through the necessity to go fast. That's been unbelievably helpful to me. The second part is, again, going back to this theme of community, which is all those things I mentioned are lovely, needed, as I see it, but it can't be done if it's not with a community of people. And in each of these topics that I've talked about, it requires a community of people, community of practitioners. So in our ecological belonging work, the Wellbeing Project, all of that is done through networks, through communities of practice. So creating that space for them to meet, creating the container through which they meet regularly, but trusting the community, the network, to be able to take on some of that work. So it's not me doing all these things all by myself. It's a community or communities of people. And so whether that's locally here in Sweden or sort of internationally, having others help is essential. Recognizing my limits, the things I'm good at doing and the things that really deplete me. Um, that's been hard because I can do a lot of things, but my body doesn't want to do a lot of those things. So knowing my limits, knowing when to ask for help, doing all the things that I never did when I was younger, um, being able to ask for help and having a group of people hold that. So that's how to manage it, and having fun. Like we go through. So life is tough. Life is hard. We all suffer in different ways. And it's easy to get caught up in the necessity of my job, my project, my new company that I'm starting, whatever it is that gets us so stressed out, or the state of the world, the war, the collapse. When you get so caught up in the meta topics or the day to day frustrations and you forget how to just enjoy living, Even if it's the small moments, that little second of staring at the beautiful sunrise after
Mm.
3 weeks of cloudiness, or feeling the moss between your toes in the forest, like, or playing with your kids, even though you should do that, like, email. Those little things, just finding the joy and letting that joy grow.
Thanks. That really paints a picture, and I can understand that in the sense that it sounds to me like you're creating containers, holding space, bringing people together. So you're the convener, the host, the facilitator, and you're not the one doing everything. There's this kind of activism, and I see a lot of people do this that they care deeply about the state of the world and what's going on. And there's a form of activism where you're doing everything, right? And you can burn out, and you've probably had those modes of existence as well. Um, and I think I want to kind of look a little bit about Paul Kingsnorth's work that you recommended from the first chat that you had with the team. And I checked out there was a podcast where he gave a Harvard lecture, and it was called 6 Ways to Resist the Machine. And it was his work is very much talking about this meta crisis and the machine that's kind of spreading and causing a lot of people to have a sense of futility. And I think it's important that we talk about this because, particularly with the younger generations growing up and seeing what's going on, beyond politics, just seeing that there is this kind of crisis of crises, these interconnected systemic issues, right? I think it's so important to have that conversation also from the perspective of what is my practice? And I think it's such an important point that you make. It's even if the world is on fire, to look outside and appreciate the sight of the forest and to feel the grass between our toes. And I think um, it's almost part of the problem is that we're so engrossed by what's going on, and it's like watching a, a massive accident or a car wreck or a house fire where there's this kind of um, that we're watching in shock, and we forget to breathe, and we forget to ground ourselves and to understand that life goes on. And I think this, coming back to that lecture of Paul's, um, he mentioned some things that relate to the work that you're doing, where he has these 4 Ps of the things that we need to remember, which he called people, place, prayer, and past. So, people relating to community, place relating to rootedness, which is such a big theme in your work, prayer as a recognition of the importance. I think he comes from a Christian background, but in a wider sense, it's the importance of spirituality and the sense of connection to something larger than ourselves and something beyond the material, right? And past, of course, is a reference to traditions and to our ancestral past. And even as you said it previously, even as Europeans, we have nature peoples, we have tribal origins, right? And so there are a few points in that lecture where he kind of explores that more deeply. He talks about building a new counterculture and living where you are to build local. And something that particularly jumped out at me, construct monasteries and become a barbarian, which I thought was really interesting. So to me, this construct monasteries is something that I've also been able to relate to. And I think it's the kind of the natural extension of the sense of rootedness. It's to have places where we protect knowledge and where we create spaces for people to heal, to ground, to learn skills, and to live a life decoupled from the incessant entertainment and distraction of what you might call the machine.
Yeah.
How do you relate to
Yeah,
this?
I think his book, End of the Four Ps that you mentioned, I'm actually going to start with a quote from Bio Kumalafe, which is overused in my space, but still beautiful, where he simply says, "The times are urgent. We must slow down." And if you take Paul's assessment of the machine, this idea of the sort of industrial modern world, industrial capitalism, which has systematically over several hundred years pulled us apart from our relationship with the land, pulled us apart from a relationship with the mystery of the world, from the sacred, from our stories. The rise of Christianity throughout Europe um, has been about replacing the land-based animist traditions that each of our countries, what we now call countries, had. And this systematic sort of folding of the human experience, first in Europe, and then, of course, that model has spread throughout the world through colonialism and capitalism, has been removing us from the mystery, from this sense of sacred, from the sense of beauty, from a sense of being slow and listening to the sounds of the world, to the voices of the world, to the animist world. And, that it's interesting you mentioned Paul's move into being an Orthodox Christian now, which is only in the last 5 years. But I became familiar with him and his partner in crime at the time, Dougal Hine, 20 years ago now, as sort of early environmentalists, activists, anarchists, and this move from those of us who recognize something like Neo in the Matrix, that something is wrong, and you're getting the signals, and something in you like already knows uh, something's wrong. The work is learning it. And, so those like Paul did his work as an environmentalist and then found this way to what every sort of thought leader or religious leader or spiritual leader or anyone has come back to for like thousands of years of examples, which is back to the land, which is back to the mystery, which is back to, purposeful, deep relationship with the world around you that takes time, that slows down, that listens. And in a time of go, 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 fast, 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 we don't have that. And so it's no coincidence that Paul has come to that conclusion, just like uh, Saint Bridget from 1300 years ago came to. We have so many examples that say, "Get to the land, listen to the wind," because that need to slow down, that need to listen to what isn't working, is as is an old example, but all the more needed now as things get faster and faster. So I'm definitely grateful for Paul's work. I think that book as well does a wonderful job to the uninitiated. So if you're paying attention to these topics like me, you start to see the overlap. But he really helps in a beautiful sort of only way a British writer can do, like just beautifully spells out what happened each step of the way. And I'm grateful for the work that he did.
So I think connected to this, I'm very, very curious because I know you've been involved in, what you might call green capitalism or conscious capitalism or impact investing. And this is a question that I've wrestled with. And particularly in Sweden, we have this issue around greenwashing, right? And I know that you've been fighting for a piece of forest, and we've had that we have that experience in common, and we've encountered the attitudes around, well, it's okay because we're going to plant new trees when we're done cutting down these 100-year-old trees. So what are you concerned about? And this is in line with modern forestry practices, and it is sustainable, and it's regenerative, and it's saving the climate. And there was a documentary that goes in and really debunks that. And I've sent a link there on your Substack for that. But related to that topic, right? With I think it's so interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these things that we talk about, how that relates to conscious capitalism, where capitalism is part of that machine, an integral part of it. I think we'd agree, right? And specifically, the need to provide a return on investment, right? This need for endless and accelerating growth, which then ends up chewing through the Earth's ecosystems and ends up with even human fracking, a term I've come across recently, which is this aggressive, extractive attention mining, right? Which the endless scroll apps do with us in order to sell us advertising. So to come back to, to formulate a question from this, it's really that do you see a way to create a bridge between impact investment or conscious capitalism, or perhaps you've got a better term, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on how you frame that, and these things that we're talking about, like rootedness, like going slowly, like constructing monasteries, where there's the need for the creation of practices and organizations and perhaps even institutions, real places. This requires investment, right? This requires investment from the perspective of generating a return that's not financial, right? So perhaps there are economic models that can be connected to these efforts, but I think there's also the potential to create a bridge from that investment world to creating these deeper outcomes, these cultural outcomes, if that makes sense. What do you think about this whole space?
That's a podcast series in itself, but I think it's the right question. Yeah, how do we place value on anything? The capitalism as it's currently defined, or money even in general, is a way of placing value on something else in exchange for someone else's value, whether that's time or an object. The modern system in which we all live is built on violence. It's built on extraction. It's built on, as you noted, not only extraction from the land, but extraction from our own minds, from our own bodies. And it is destroying the planet. It's destroying the cultures of people far away, but even right here at home, in our own minds and our own ways of living. And I think what we're seeing in the form of, I've been using the term collapse, but in the crumbling systems and the end of the world as we know it, that's happening right now, is that this system of violent extraction and assuming endless growth with a finite amount of resources on the planet can't continue. So then the question becomes, how do we place value on that which is important? Which aligns with the same question that I'm asking and others are asking, which is, how do we live? What does it mean to live? What does the lived experience mean? To your point, yes, if we're talking about energy to transition, food transition, safety, security, etc., those all do require money. And there are people, both traditional investors and quote unquote impact investors, or the other terms you used, who will try to derive some sort of financial return from those. But I think we're seeing and not just me, but think that we're into the late stage of capitalism, and how we use the money that's available right now to buy things, make changes, do preparation isn't going to be worth the same amount that it's currently worth in probably the coming decade. And I'm going to say things here that will need citing, and I'm happy to share for the notes, the show notes. But the idea that most of the capital we have on this planet is built on the idea of debt. And so we've amassed trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of debt in the world that all needs to be repaid. And it's made up. It's all made up. And the idea that money is worth something today is only because someone else says it is. And I think as you start to continue to see the crumbling of trust in institutions, the crumbling of trust in the petrodollar, being backed on petroleum, that people are going to start finding value in a different way. What that looks like, I don't know yet. But in the short term, I think there are people who are trying to extract some sort of value from their doing good. But what's more interesting to me is what the philanthropic culture does. So Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation has said, there's a big demand from the nonprofit sector, especially as organizations like USAID and the other national governments that have been giving money in developing countries, as they're cutting that funding, the hope is that philanthropies will pick up that capital and so donate more than their usual 3% per year. The Gates Foundation has basically said, we acknowledge that our money is going to be worth a lot less. Our endowments are going to be worth a lot less. So we're going to do a massive spend down over the next, I think it's 25 years to get rid of it, because the money is not going to be worth as much as we all think the average person thinks it's going to be worth. So what's more interesting to me is whether it's impact investors or philanthropies or governments or a combination of all of those is rising to the moment and saying, yeah, right now we have money, capital, availability of stuff. Let's use that stuff to start creating the conditions for the world in which we want to live. So the indictment on capitalism in general, colonialism more broadly, and the value of money as an object that we use is quickly changing and being redefined. I'll stop there, but yeah, I'll stop there.
That's super interesting. So I think I really like that point. And I think it's, because a lot of the listeners here are really engaged in this, let's say, work or perhaps even struggle, right, to create a better world. And a lot of them are struggling with resources, and they're trying to formulate a way to communicate that, and they struggle to formulate. They struggle to present it as a business plan. Hey, I'm saving the planet, and it's going to return you 10% PA if you invest in this work, right? It's very difficult to, if you're working with men and men's mental health, for example, there's an important return that's not financial. And I love this argument that the money is never going to be worth more than it is now. So let's make sure we spend it on something worthwhile, right? Because absolutely, whether you call it deflation or systemic collapse or whatever you want to call that, there are so many reasons why the value of the fiat currencies we use is going to decline. So I think that's a really important point for philanthropic spending. So
I'll make this a super fast version of the story.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. This will be a fast one. I go for just on impact investing, because I spent 7 or 8 years working in impact investing from the very beginning here in Europe, helping to sort of nurture that term itself, but also the ecosystem around that space from the investors and the entrepreneurial side, et cetera. in the discussion with impact investing from the beginning, it was about something we called patient capital. It was, you with money are going to invest, yes, in a financial way with an expectation of some return, but it wasn't it wasn't in the same way that capitalism currently does it, which is quarterly, which is, you said 10% return or X number of percent return. The expectation from the beginning of the impact investing space was patient capital, long-term investments where you might get above zero, but not necessarily much more. These were usually often philanthropists themselves, but they found that that economic model was beneficial in some ways. And it has been bastardized into this idea of just being another way to get double-digit returns on investment, like a tech stock. And as you're seeing the philanthropic space, and especially the impact investor space, being occupied by all these people who made their money in the tech space, in the tech industry, who are of a younger generation who haven't understood a sense of long-term responsibility of doing for the common good, but they're trained into this sort of machine model of, short-term returns, scale and bail. That's what the impact space that I grew up in doesn't exist. And I don't see impact investing, most impact investors, as a solution to the problem. And I worry about the philanthropic space and the new ones getting into it because they don't have the long-term thinking. They don't have, they're coming from the world in which we're living now, and you don't have that longer-term commitment. But really, it's the big question is, why does there have to be huge sums of money in the pockets of the few to make those decisions? Why aren't governments doing more of the work that we should be having them do? That's also another podcast.
Absolutely, it is. And it's probably a question I ask myself most days when I see the potential for what could be and where money flows currently. But yes, that's a whole another podcast or podcast series, as you said earlier. Um, so you're really part of an emerging field of practice. It's hard to imagine a job title that encompasses uh, the breadth of what you do. Um, but for this work, what do you, and perhaps you'll touch on that in your book, but what do you wish that existed to support this work, not just for you to be able to do it, but also for, say, younger people that are now listening to this podcast, that are seeing the rise of AI, that are completely uncertain about their career choices. Yeah, do I want to study for 6 years and only to be replaced by a robot, which will most certainly happen? We're seeing the breakneck pace of development in that field in particular. So yeah, what do you wish existed to support people to do this kind of work?
Mm. This is the magic wand question. Um, so I'm a father, as I've noted. Um, how any of us, no matter our age, but especially young people, prepare for a world that is as unpredictable as it's ever been, at least in the last 100 years. I don't envy them, first of all. Um, but as a parent and as society, we are responsible for raising them to be able to deal with whatever that challenge is. And the topics I've talked about throughout this conversation are our disconnection from a sense of community, from the ritual and ceremony that bring us into places where we can make sense of a changing world. Every culture, every tradition has had rituals and ceremonies for grieving, for coming of age, for processing change, war, etc. And the big challenge for most of the world, especially our part of the world, is we don't have those containers. We don't have those ways of learning how to deal with adversity and how to process adversity. And so, as a parent, as a member of society, the biggest thing I can do, uh, both proactively, and also encourage others to do is find your tribe, is find your community, um, not necessarily out of fear, though there are the unknown is fearful, but doing it as a way of resilience. And when I talk about belonging, belonging isn't just this feel good sense that I belong here, but it is a coping mechanism. It is a survival tool that humans have used from the beginning of time. We hear about the billionaire class, or Epstein class, as I like to call them now, dealing with or buying bunkers, and then just planning to ride out the storm. But every culture that has survived massive changes in the history of humanity has done so in community. So the prepared child now, the prepared adult now, prepared adult later will be someone who has learned, while it's still relatively peaceful and stable, to deal with adversity, to process it together, to deal with grief and grieving, because there's going to be a lot of grief and grieving that's required in the coming years. So it's finding your tribe. It's finding ways to find joy and belonging, and living in the moment with that tribe. It's learning skills that your great grandparents knew, but you might not know anymore, uh, from fixing stuff and growing food and learning to deal with less. But the challenges, and going back to that bio Kumalafe quote, the times are urgent and we must slow down. And this idea that slowing down means having less, doing less, expecting less. And when you've done that, as I've done in the last few years, there's actually more joy there. And there's more time to do the things you want to do. There's more love and peace and time for music and time for the things that make life worth living. So we can't plan exactly what's going to happen in the future. Never have been able to do that. And we have no idea what's coming, for better or worse. But what we do know is that resilience, human resilience, uh, sense of community, sense of belonging, will get us through most of those challenges. And that's the invitation to anyone who's listening to this: is find your tribe.
That's sage advice right there. And I want to reflect on that a little bit. I think that, there's this concept of rot and regenerate, in the sense of this is also kind of relating to nature and mycelial ideas of where we are right now. It's so important to reflect on where we're losing energy, where we're putting our attention that is, let's say, not productive, where we're losing energy and attention, and to cut off those activities or those parts of our lives so that a new life can emerge for ourselves. And I think for our listeners, your journey of becoming, in a way, models the path that a lot of these people are on, where they're still a little bit earlier in that process, where they're in that moment of realizing, I'm in this career, I've achieved financial success, I've achieved the status that comes with reaching a certain level, right? And the machine, within the machine, if you want to put it that way. But it feels hollow. I feel ungrounded. I feel unfulfilled, and I need to shift to a life that's more meaningful, really. And so in this process, like, if you've shared a few practices that have been helpful. There's a connection to nature. There's the Zen practice. But like, in summary, if you had to go back to, if you went back to yourself, that was at this moment of being working with Al Gore and being at the height of success in that political work, and you wanted to help yourself transition to where you are now, assuming that you're now in a place where you feel like you're doing work that truly matters, right? What is it that, if someone was engaging in this transformation with eyes open, that they could do in a grounded and practical sense to get to that place?
Great question. And I get to go back to younger version of me every single day as a dad. Um, those kids are a mirror to my younger self and my current self. And my wife and I, before we had kids, we said that two things are important. One is that, the golden rule, so that they be good citizens, good human beings toward one another. Uh, and the other one is self regulation. So in Buddhism, it's mindfulness, it's breathing, and of working the stress of living. It's a nervous system reaction. It is your body sending a message to you that something is not right. And in a society in which we live, where we pop a pill to make it better, or we just sort of quote unquote suck it up and move on, we're that, and the body is amazing. It's telling you exactly what's wrong. And because we have just distraction, urgency happening around us so much, we don't stop to listen to that message. So as a parent, when my kids, and especially one is 13, so he's full of sort of hormonal rage and anxiety right now, breathe. That simple idea of breathing, it's become trite in my family. And my kids have heard it so many times. But the idea of just breathing in, and the practice there doesn't require some meditation app. It doesn't require anything overly complicated or a bunch of rules and levels. It is a simple process of sitting quiet, counting in. I am here. I am home. You can come up with whatever saying you want. 1, 2, 3, out 2, 3. But this idea of just calming down, whether it's for a brief moment or a longer period of time, it allows us to start listening to the sounds and messages that our body is sending us. When you start tuning in beyond the exact moment, you start to then, during that time of quiet mindfulness, not thinking, just being in your breath, then you start to realize the other things that might not be working out so well. And then the messages get a little louder, a little more clear. And I think, it's easy to say sitting here in comfortable Sweden, just breathe, everyone. But if in the most stressful environments I've been in, I've been shot at while I'm in the Marine Corps. The things you do during the most stressful periods start with the breath. You have to start with the breath and listen to the body system and calm the nervous system. And when you calm the nervous system, you're much more clear headed and able to sort of make better decisions.
Yeah, that's some very grounded advice. So thank you for that. And I I think we're just about. I think we've covered a really good arc, and it's really come back to mindfulness and rootedness in the moment. So I like that, because we started out there and then we went all around and we came back to that place. Um, just because we're um, mushroom people, I wanted to talk specifically about the Fungi is the Future Award and your involvement with that project. And then perhaps after that, if there's anything else that you want to share with our listeners. But tell us a little bit
Mm.
about that work and what got you involved, and what's your interest in that whole world.
I've been fascinated with mycelium, fungi, uh, mushrooms, the whole world that we sort of classify as fungi. Um, and I met Susanne Glöschen, who's the founder of the Futures Fungi Award, several years ago now. And this person I'd never met, and she just started talking. So I had read Sheldrake's book, Entanglement, uh, and I just read it and nobody was talking about mushroom stuff. And all of a sudden I meet this woman who also was talking about it and was doing this, had this idea for an award and was getting that going. And I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. So uh, my role with that was as an advisor to Suzanne. It's her show, the people she's brought together. She has been a force in the world, drawing attention to fungi, uh, and asked me to be on the jury for the award the first year. So I've been mainly a cheerleader and supporter of Susan since that first year. Um, but for me, fungi, both as a sort of an analogy or mycelium, we use that analogy a lot. Um, but this idea that we as humans have created a bunch of objects largely from petroleum that are destroying the planet and from other harmful material and destroying our ability to live on that planet. And this gift from the natural world, fungi can be used for mycoremediation, can be used for cleaning up toxic sites, cleaning up toxic water, eating diapers, and we've all seen this example, to providing medicines, to even psilocybin as being a tool for sort of and broadening our consciousness, giving us a view both of ourself and how we fit in the world, but also of sort of our broader connection to the planet and to the cosmos. And it's, I don't want to say we're using mycelium, but our ability to work with nature, which mycelium has many potential benefits that we can work with, and finding those people, which I think Futures Fungi Award has done brilliantly. This ecosystem that Susanne has built is finding the researchers doing it. It's finding the entrepreneurs, the innovators doing it. It's finding the investors of different shapes and sizes who can support that, and being a spokesperson for the beauty of it. I'm truly grateful for it that just bird out dealing of fungi, and some really great, look them up. Futures Fungi Award. It's great. I think by the time this is released, the prize will have just closed for this time. But uh, it's a wonderful initiative. Super happy to be a supporter of it.
Thanks for sharing that. It looks like it bridges a lot of the worlds that you work within. From, as you mentioned, that kind of magic spark that can often be the starting point for people's journey of inner work and self-exploration, and realizing, hey, the trajectory I'm on isn't wholesome. I need to go deeper, right? So those experiences with mushrooms can certainly precipitate that growth journey, and of course, yes, the bioremediation. So it's kind of bridging also into impact investment and ecological restoration. Certainly does seem like mushrooms hold an important key to restoring the natural world and cleaning up the world, as you put it, with the
And
ability.
they always have, right?
Yeah, they've always been there doing that. Absolutely.
I'm fascinated. So, for full disclosure, Futures Fungi doesn't focus on the psilocybin aspect of fungi.
Yes, yes.
Um, uh, and speaking to what you just said, both from personal experience, so I'd say it helped me to fast forward years of sort of trauma healing and seeing myself in a positive way in connection with sort of the big picture, with the universe, with the land. It was a wonderful tool for me and countless other people I know. Um, so I'm grateful for that, and the messages that plant medicines have provided for thousands of years to communities around the world. The beauty of mycelium themselves, of fungi themselves, both as a nourishing food and as having countless ways of improving our bodies and improving the body of the earth is amazing. I mean, what it's amazing, and the fact that we're only just now really getting to know much about it is fascinating. And there's like this, if you think in mythological terms, the world that we're living in. I mean, we've got uh, all these bad things happening, the crumbling of systems, the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah.
And we've got these amazing sort of solutions, technologies, and non-technological ways that we're learning or relearning or discovering for the first time. So you've got this, and then fungi comes out, and all of a sudden it can do these amazing things. It could be batteries. It can be cleaning up nuclear waste. There's all these like fascinating sort of peak stories that are all coming at, is it war or is it peace? And this sort of animate the planet is amazing, and there's this animate flow of sort of, framed at the very beginning, good versus bad, dark versus light. It is the classic mythological story. And then there become these new characters that come in that can do something amazing. And fungi has been that in many different ways. It's awesome to watch. I'm not sure if you're a Trekkie, but there's so Paul Stamets. I'm sure most of your listeners will know him. Uh, they named a character after him in one of the most recent TV shows, and they used mycelium to like sort of time travel around the universe, this sort of hidden network of mycelium. That's science fiction for now, but it's pretty cool. It's pretty wonderful.
Yeah, that was a great reference. And I think there's definitely a big, um, there's a, this is not spoken about very much, but I think there's definitely a connection between Trekkies and uh, mushroom fans, just in
Mhm.
a sense of, having this regard for something larger than ourselves, and being fascinated by nature, and also the potential for us to create a society of perhaps not enlightened people, but people that are above all focused on becoming a better version of themselves, right? And to me, this is what Star Trek really was about. It's like, what if society was made up of people who, above all, are just trying to grow, right? To become better humans.
I agree, and I'll respond to that too. In case I didn't make the connection on the Star Trek, right? So they called it the Spore Drive. You guys are Spore Journeys, and the character was named after Paul Stamets. Um, no, but that story, the very first nonprofit board I joined when I was 21 or 22 years old, uh, I felt like a little kid in an adult room. And someone said, yeah, I grew up in the 90s, 80s and 90s. So I was watching Star Trek, The Next Generation at the time. And the person said, "Oh, Shawn, tell us something about yourself. What defines your worldview?" I'm like, I was 22. I never thought about what defined my worldview. I was like, Star Trek: The Next Generation defines my worldview. And I didn't appreciate that at the time fully, but I would still stand by what 21, 22-year-old version of me said. And, that story takes place sort of several hundred years in the future. And humans in our current version, we're still adolescents. We're still figuring out how to deal with living. And we break stuff. We do it in a messy way. And whether we're talking about moving toward enlightenment or just sort of better versions of ourselves, I mean, that is the sort of the mythological journey we're on ourselves, is learning how to not break the entire planet and our ability to live on that, doing it in such a way where we can live more deeply, live more connected, live more beautifully enlightened, sure, uh, and be curious. And, the current version of how we're living might not be the best way to do that, but we get the opportunity every single day to decide what a better version would be, a better version of ourselves, a better version of our communities or of the society in which we live. And that's what's interesting. And that the idea of hope, of agency, that we can do something every day to make our part of the world better, and then our ability to cooperate as humans to do that in a more controlled way and a more uh, in a larger way is pretty amazing. So I'm grateful to Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek and that whole nerd space that I love being part of for a very long time.
Thanks for sharing that. As am I. As am I. I think it's important work, and it was an important cultural influence, particularly in a society where so many versions of the future are very grim, right? Dark, edgy, collapse, corporate control, Blade Runner, right? Let's hope we don't end up there. But I think
I mean,
with
that's the origin story of Star Trek in general. Is like,
yeah,
first contact happened after nuclear war, where humanity nearly destroyed itself, and we're not far from that right now. So it's it's interesting.
that's true. In that sense, it's not utopian, it's more protopian. Protopian being kind of a bit more grounded, right? So acknowledging the fact that humanity had to rise from the ashes of nuclear war to become what it is in that show.
Mhm.
It's an important point, absolutely. I wanted to reconnect to an earlier point that we discussed, and I think it's interesting that we now introduced mushrooms in this way to the conversation, because I think when we're talking to young people who are uncertain about career choices and they feel like they might be displaced by technology. Um, I think a good answer, and correct me if you think otherwise, but I think get into mushrooms. Apart from all of the good advice that you gave about mindfulness, about rootedness, about finding your tribe, but specifically what to do. I think in mushrooms, there's so much to explore, and it is a grounding activity, right? It is related to nature, and it does hold the potential to answer things. And there's no AI large learning model that's going to make uh, fungi redundant, right? That's not how that works. It maybe will make some technological or skilled work redundant, but mushrooms are always going to be there. So perhaps that's one answer, right? When we're trying to find a way forward and trying to think about what we should get involved in.
It's one answer among many. You know, the we keep hearing about jobs being replaced by AI, and they are, of course. And at the end of the day, there's still going to be a bunch of humans living on the planet who need to be doing something, and whether they're doing that defined by making money and doing 40 hours of work each week, or providing value in some completely different way. That's the space we're in right now. And the world is fascinating. And we're always going to need curious people scratching at the edges of something new and figuring it out. And whether that's with the countless benefits of fungi or any other thing that you and I might not even know about yet, that as as we heard from Coach Lasso and show Ted Lasso, always be curious. And this idea of just being curious and being curious with others and learning from one another and figuring out what works best. It's going to be life's always a challenge. There's going to be bigger challenges for some. And we still need people to be curious and want to do something better than what we had before. And I think keeping that in mind, despite all of the challenges, is enjoy the journey.
Yes, yes, that's true. With I can certainly relate to that. With the journey of Mycelium Hub, this was inspired by reinventing organizations. Frederic Laloux, if you've come across that word, teal organizations, right? Like, what's the next level of purpose-driven companies that people are building, combined with the idea of working with mycelium, working with fungi. So fantastic fungi was a big influence there as well, and led us
Of
to,
course.
create a place in Sweden where we gathered people. And that journey was not always easy, and I've described some of that in my recent update to kind of explain the shift to being more global and less rooted in this chapter. But we always ate well. We had people there, and we gathered around the table, and we ate good food, and we laughed, and we talked, right? And so this was such an important core element beyond all the abstractions. Um, and I think we will return to that. We will return to places where we can root after this period of being global. And I think this conversation is a powerful reminder of that, of the importance of that. So thank you for that. Is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners before we close, on reflecting back on this conversation or about your work?
Thank you. I think the conclusion of this topic, this discussion, as is the conclusion of the upcoming book, as is the conclusion of every discussion I have with people, is kind of like you just described with the Mycelium Hub. It's people coming together. It's people walking a path, both individually and in community, one sort of small step at a time, one choice at a time, and figuring it out together, and not being so stressed with the measurable outcome of those individual steps and choices, but with the mystery of taking those steps and choices. Like life is short. We are these wonderful sort of soul aliens who came to planet Earth for 80 years or something and get to just enjoy the beauty of living here with people, with the natural world. And it's an amazing, amazing opportunity that we often forget because we're so stuck meeting someone else's expectations or deadlines. So I would just remind everyone that, the path forward is by walking, it's by listening to your body, and enjoy each step and enjoy each decision. It's not all bad all the time. It can be beautiful. It is beautiful.
Celebrate the present moment and the beauty therein, right? Find that beauty every day. That's a fantastic sentiment to end this conversation on. Shawn, it's been a pleasure, and it's been a tour de force of life on this planet to talk to you. So thank you so much for giving us a glimpse of your world. We're going to put the links to the various organizations and projects that you're connected to on the bottom of the podcast. And I look forward to future exchanges and to develop this conversation. And I'm very, very, very much looking forward to your book. And I look forward to reading what you ended up putting in there. And I think this is important work. So I celebrate you for doing it, and I wish you much success looking forward.
Thank you. And I would say the same to you and the work you guys are doing, both from the original point of bringing people who are on their individual journeys, giving them a platform to talk about that. I'm grateful for that, especially the upcoming community you have now around Spore Journeys. Super exciting to see how that develops. And I think, again, when we're taking those small steps together, whether it's virtually or in person, is so important. I think people need to know they're not alone in whatever's happening in their heads or their bodies. So having a community to figure out how to live and how to cooperate, how to tinker and be curious, that's a gift. So thank you for that. And thanks for the time today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.